to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands, waterways that we're meeting on today. For me, I'm coming from Bunurong country, which is part of the Kulin Nation in Victoria, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm going to hand straight over to our wonderful facilitators today to let them introduce themselves. For those that don't know them, we have Fabian Datner and Michelle Crouch from Datner Group. So over to you.
Thanks, Chris. A big warm hug to all of you, wherever you're coming from. It's very precious to us that you've given us this hour. For your own sakes, we're going to ask all of you to turn your cameras on. We truly don't care if you're eating, you have children. We know for some people it's just not possible. If you can turn your cameras on, turn your cameras on, because that's part of creating emotionally safe spaces. And this is a conversation for and with you. And we're going to try and involve you as much as we can. We've been a bit overwhelmed by the response to this topic, which says everything, frankly. The issue of emotional connectivity, resilience, how we deal with emotions constructively is very clearly a big issue for many people, which is why we wanted to do this with you. I'm going to get a show of hands, if you can, those of you who've done Compass or Compass Advance or a Datner Group program. So I love you guys. Hands up if you've done a Datner Group program. Okay, as many of you as possible getting your cameras on. And hands up if you're new to this. This is a new experience for you coming in. Alison and Het. Jack, very brave, Jack. Very glad to see someone with a beard in the group. Otherwise, it would be almost entirely women, which also tells you something interesting. So, Jack, we might overuse you today, but see what happens. Thank you. And what a testament to the Compass community that it's so visible. Helping you is why we exist, and we don't want to do this in a gimmicky way. And we least of all want to do it in a gimmicky way today on this topic. And we're going to try and give you as much constructive help as we can, as quickly as possible, while keeping you entertained and involved. So the first thing is we did actually synthesize why you were coming. And I think we have that in a summary slide and or presentation. But in principle, and Chris, are you running the slides today?
Yes, I am.
And I think we have a summary of the feedback, Sarah, is that right?
No, we've got a poll, Fabe. We're about to run a poll to get the feedback live in the moment for those that are attending right now.
Are we? Right.
Yes.
So what actually happened when you spoke to us is a lot of the feedback was, how emotions play out in the day-to-day, recognizing what emotions actually are, learning how to deal with emotion more effectively, and some baseline tools. So we're going to run a Q&A activity with you and see what comes up right in front of you all. And Michelle and I are going to do this together. So, Chris, let's get the poll up and running.
I'm going to present a little Mentimeter. So if you have your phones there, you'll see very shortly once it comes up.
Penelope's got her hand up. Penelope Dennis. Do you have your hand up by accident? Penelope's hand's gone down. Well, we hope we get to answer all your questions, Penelope, as we progress. Go, Chris. We're getting up.
Yes, we're getting up this Mentimeter. If you could take a shot of this QR code, or at the top you can go to menti.com and use the code, the numbers at the top of the screen there, and it will come up with a question for you to answer, and I will move through these slides. So we'll go fairly quick. So the first one being, do you know what emotion?
Let's hold on. Waggle your hand in the air if you have no idea how to read a QR code or how to get onto Mentimeter. Don't be shy of doing that, because we want your story in this as well. Is anyone struggling how to do Mentimeter? Good. We're all getting pretty familiar with the QR codes. So get as many of you can get your answers in. So that's, do you know what emotions are? Very excited to see that a growing number of you say you know what they are. That's always an exciting thing. And what you think they are and where you end up at the end of this conversation might be a little bit different. All right, next question, Chris. What does it feel like when you are in control? So being in control of your emotions helps you feel calm and confident, comfortable, satisfied, confident, self-assured, organized and productive. There's a word in there that's a bit of an oddball word that's confronting. And when you're in control of your emotions, it can feel confronting. I'm a great believer that the odd voice is a very important voice. Would the person who said confronting care to share? Don't if you don't want to, but I always think we hear things from the voice at the edge of our thinking that is useful. So whoever said confronting when you're in control, would you be up for sharing that? Don't be shy about that. Sometimes what control of emotions can feel is I'm putting a leader on what I'm feeling, and I wish I wasn't. I wish I could actually say out loud what I'm really thinking and feeling, as opposed to controlling it. For most people, when you talk about controlling an emotion, it means I don't feel controlled by the emotion. I am in control of the emotion. The next question, please, Chris. Do emotions follow a logical sequence? Yes or no? Oh, nice.
Good one.
No, they're not really logical. So you think. How interesting. Oh, I'm very satisfied with this answer. Now we've got something to help you with. Some of you are not answering, intimidated now. Well, the first thing to know is 11 of you got that right and 49 of you got that wrong so far. We're going to come back to that. Emotions actually have an absolute logical sequence, and I'm going to give you a live demonstration on that shortly. This is a really interesting one for all of you. We can often think that emotions are random and they're subject to context and they're not within our control. So therefore, when we get upset or triggered by an emotion, it feels chaotic. And I maybe end up saying something that I regret or doing something that I regret. Next one, please. Do you need emotions to make decisions? Yes or no? Yes and no. Sometimes, absolutely. A few no's and some yeses. That's also a great suite of responses. We're going to come back to that one in a minute too. Do you need emotions to make decisions? Some of you say yes, some of you say no, and some of you say sometimes, and it depends. And one person is very clear about that. Absolutely. We're going to go through the next questions. Under stress, do you feel in charge of emotions or are they in charge of you? Under stress, do you feel in charge of your emotions or are they in charge of you? So 17 people so far say I'm in charge of the emotions when I'm under stress, and 44 say my emotions are in charge, not me. Next question. What worries you about losing emotional control? Embarrassing, decision-making becomes impaired. That's a big one. Saying or doing something I'll regret later, inability to make right decisions, my impact in self, others, and surrounds. Absolutely. Doing something that will cause damage, big one. Reacting in a way that may damage relationships. Nice, rich database here, which we will pull together after this session. A lot of things worry us. We recognize that losing emotional control often has very negative consequences to ourselves, to others. We either act or say things that we subsequently regret. And the last question, what does it feel like when you are in control? I think we did that.
Yes, we did that. It was a little out of order, sorry, but we can go back to.
No, that's fine. So let me stop sharing for a moment. And I'm going to give you some surprising things to think about. The first one, and we can provide you all the research you like on this, but I want you to imagine you're in a car and there's a driver and a passenger. Contrary to popular belief, your emotions are in the driving seat. Your emotional self never gives up the wheel, the brakes, the accelerator. Your emotional self has control of the decisions that you make. It is physically impossible to make a decision without emotional engagement. We think we can do it, but we can't. Everyone who's involved in sales knows we'll gather the data and we will try and make it look impressive to win someone over. But in the end, some mysterious other thing comes into play and people make a decision based on how they feel and then get the facts to justify. Reason and logic have been elevated over the last 150 years in the way human beings operate. We've put our writing down into 10-point typeface, single line spacing on an A4 page. We've reduced the scope of our thinking to figures on a spreadsheet. If you've ever been responsible for developing a spreadsheet, for instance, a profit and loss statement, and you're showing it to an executive, and you've spent some considerable time compiling that data, you give it to the exec and they look at it and in 30 seconds find an error in the data. They could never put the data together the way you have, but they see the error. So there's another part of our brain at work scanning information, looking for patterns. And the biggest pattern we ever find is the emotional context we're operating in, what we feel ourselves and what other people are feeling. That system is like the operating system MS-DOS that sits underneath Word today. Our reasoning brain is like an update on Word programming from Microsoft a week ago. The emotional brain is agile, it is flexible, it is scarily fast. 0 to 6 seconds to bring up an emotion to cause an action. The emotions have a logical sequence, and we're going to show you that in a moment. I'm going to be passing to Shell, and she's going to take you through some tools to help you see how emotions have a logical sequence. When you compare IQ and EQ, I want you all to write down 4 letters, because EQ is not just emotional information. It's 4 things. It's, can I, 1, recognize emotions in myself and other people? Can I even name them? So the ability to talk about and name emotions comes from likely childhood conditions where talking about emotions was okay. It was celebrated in your family. People shared how they felt. Adults that sometimes struggle with emotional language come from families where we valued reason and logic. We valued mathematics and engineering and physics. We did not value the arts, creative writing, music, talking about how we felt. So what happens is emotional language is not developed. It doesn't mean your brain isn't feeling stuff. You just can struggle with the words to describe what your brain is thinking and feeling. So logic is a servant or a passenger in a car with your emotional brain. So the part of emotions that people struggle with are the sense of when emotion is out of control. And it's scary. Hands up who feel that's one of the biggest challenges for you. It's when emotions feel like they're out of control. Just pop your hands up. Okay, got a lot of people. When they're out of control, it's not that the emotion is bad, it is that the ability to manage that emotion is struggling. And so somebody else does something that I just think is wrong. In fact, worse than wrong, I think it's unfair, immensely unfair. Now, fairness is a big value for me personally. And when I see somebody else being unfair to one of you, for instance, I get irritated. And if they do it once, twice, 3 times, might get angry. And when I'm angry, it's because they are doing something that's getting between me and something I think is really important, being fair with other people. In my head, I have a story that only people who are rude and unfair would behave that way. Therefore, this person is being rude. Now, the person might not know the story that Phoebe is telling herself about fairness. But because I project the story, now my primary emotion of irritation or anger turns into a feeling of being angry. And I go home feeling angry, and I can influence family dynamics. I feel angry at home. I don't talk through the problem with you. Maybe I've had an interaction with Jane and I don't talk to her about that interaction. Now my team, and on my team is Jess and Chris and Het, and we've got at least one guy, so Jack, they're on my team and they can see I'm angry. So now the team has a mood that is affected by an angry person. So a primary emotion is 0 to 6 seconds. I add a story to it that only people who are unfair with others, I will see them as rude. I add a rule to it. I add a story to it. I remember when my father didn't listen to or respect my younger brother and was unkind and cruel to him. And it felt unfair to me as a teenager. And I got angry. And now I pick up that memory around that emotion and I put it on somebody else, Jane. I make her like some part of my childhood. And all this happens in about 6 to 60 seconds. And so that story comes forward and it becomes something that is controlling how I'm responding. Now, the problem is not the emotion. All your big emotions take about 0 to 6 seconds to come and go. It's the stories you attach to those emotions that make it very difficult. So when we talk about emotions, you are the lion tamer. You control them, but you don't want to get rid of them. And the one documented case of a man who had acute epilepsy brought on by a severe stroke. Prior to this event, he had been a successful engineer. He was married, he had 2 children, he was a partner in an engineering business. He has a stroke and it burns out that part of his brain that mitigated or managed or controlled emotional states. He has an operation to deal with fitting as a consequence of the stroke. The operation further damaged that portion of the brain which mitigates emotional reasoning, the amygdala. And when he came out from the operation, the fitting had dropped down significantly, and he appeared to all intents and purposes normal. He goes back to resume a normal life and progressively discovers he can't make a decision about anything. He can't make a decision about the food he's going to eat, the shoes he's going to put on, the socks he will wear. He can't make a decision about whether he should use a knife or a fork. He certainly can't make complex decisions related to business, client relationships, budgets, engineering specifications. A year from the moment he came out of the sedation for the operation, his marriage is broken down. He can't work in the business, and he's living in a back room in his brother's house, really as close to dysfunctional as possible, because every decision, every day, small and large, you're using your emotion to determine your decision. So emotional agility is the ability to use that emotional information. So I can recognize emotion in myself and others. I can use that information rather than run away from it. I understand emotions do have a logical sequence. So if I'm irritated and I don't deal with what irritates me, irritation can very quickly turn into frustration. If I still don't deal with it, frustration can turn into anger. And if I don't deal with the anger, anger will turn into fury, and there'll either be a massive fight or I'm out of here. And now I'm going to hand over Shell to give us some of the context for some of the things that I've said.
Thanks, Fabe. So let's just start with that recap. The next part's going to be a bit of a recipe to give you some structure around what Fabe's just talked about. And for those, hands up if you've done Mesquite or an EI diagnostic, Maddie. Okay, so some of you are the experts in this. So you're going to look at this and say, I know this. And we can know something intellectually and still get that emotional or amygdala hijack. So we can all do with that little refresh. So let's start with slide 4. Thanks, Chris. And we'll just move along through the pack as I explain. I love this quote from Susan David, who is one of the pioneers of emotional intelligence. And basically, emotions are like the ocean. None of us can stop them from coming on. None of us can stop the trigger, but we can choose which ones to serve. And by the end of today, we'll have a quick summary of how we work that out. Camilla and Thea, you've got hands up. Can I ask that we hold questions to the end, or is it something now? Great, I'll leave it. So the first part in dealing with these waves is understanding emotional agility. And we're just going to share a model with you from the Mesquite, where we're going to break it down into the 4 categories. Next slide, thanks, Chris. Where the first thing we have to do is we have to be able to recognize or perceive it. If we don't know what we're feeling, how can we decide whether this is useful for us to get the job done, so to speak? And once we recognize it, we have to decide, do we want to use this emotion to get the job done, to reach our goal, or do we want to park it? So we have to decide, is this a mood task match? Or do we have to flip the switch and say, you know what? I'm late for a meeting. I got held up in the car by roadworks on the way to the office. I'm about to go into a celebration at the office, and in that meeting, I need to be inspiring and I need to walk in that door with energy that permeates others. If I take in the emotion of the frustration of feeling the delay, the roadworks, I'm not going to be effective. So we have to be able to use and work out, is this useful? We've got to understand why that emotion has actually happened in the first place to then decide, are we going to manage that? And how do I manage the emotions of other people in the room? So next slide. Thanks, Chris. So when we talk about the understanding of emotions, we're going to, for the sake of today, just break that down into 7 universal emotions that every single one of us have the capacity to feel because of the same trigger. And when we talk about trigger, we're saying the same response, but the story is going to be different for each and every one of us. I love dogs, and I'm going to feel a great deal of sadness when my fur baby passes. But somebody who doesn't have a connection to dogs can't relate to, why is Michelle so upset over the loss of her dog? Okay, I might not be able to relate to that, but actually family is really important to me. So I can start to feel a sense of empathy because she's lost a dog and it's important to her. So we need to know what someone else is feeling. Now, I don't know about you, but I grew up in a world, my family, emotions were pretty much comfortable or uncomfortable. Emotions that were comfortable, good. Yeah, we're good today. Yep, good. Emotions that were uncomfortable were bad or just swept under the carpet. So for all of us, it's really important to get a sense of, well, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling that? So I can move to managing. And next slide, you'll get to see that once we embrace the understanding of emotion, there's a whole world of descriptions that describe what might first be good, bad, uncomfortable, comfortable, to, okay, maybe I am feeling a little bit happy. A little bit happy. What would a little bit happy look like? Maybe I'm content. Maybe I'm a little bit frustrated. Oh, but I don't do angry. Actually, frustration is low-level anger. So let's just own it. What is the frustration telling me? There's a goal that's not being met or a need not being met. So let's just take the data and decide what we want to do with it, which is going to lead us to the next poll to hear from you as to what do you do when you've had that little emotional response, you're about to deliver a presentation or go into a meeting or meet the family, whatever it is. What are some of the strategies that you call on? So Chris is going to put up another poll and we're going to hear from you before we give you the next part of this. So what strategies do you use in those moments, whatever that moment is, to manage your own emotion, but actually then to be aware of, oh my goodness, now I've got an audience I have to manage too. And that might be before a challenging conversation or before a meeting where you know you have to get a specific outcome. So you really need to be aware of what you're feeling and what you're bringing out in others. So let's hear what we've got here. Breathing, deep breath work, step back and reassess, stop talking. A lot of breath work happening here. Mindful detachment, prepare and plan. I love that break from a situation. My go-to is if I'm on screen or in meeting, I'll just take a pause. I might even take a sip of coffee, water, just to get that little pause to recollect my thoughts and feelings. Remember what and why. I love essential oils, which is a favorite. So there's a lot of great advice there. So you're not new to this. I mean, we don't get to where we are without having an understanding of what we need to manage our emotions. So any questions or feedback before we move on to what we're going to do to give you that little script. Anything so far? Fabe, would you like to add anything to that so far? Otherwise, I'll keep going. You're on mute.
Probably one thing I would say to everyone, because you've come here, is what are the reasons why people don't get emotional information? And it's often because we don't look at each other. And the more emotionally triggered we are, the less we look. I was in a meeting with a very senior leader from a very high-profile American corporation this morning, coaching early, and he was getting very agitated about something. And suddenly, you know, we had been talking and looking at each other, and he's doing this as he talks about this meeting he was in and how he was feeling about it. And he actually, wasn't looking at me, and you knew in his head, at the time he was triggered, he was not looking at the people in the room. So it is very common with emotional complexity that we don't look at each other. The second reason we don't gather good information about what's actually happening is we look, but we don't see. So I promise you, painful as it might be for you to know this, of the nearly 90 people who are in this call, it's highly likely that only 10 to 20 of you have got high EQ, i.e. your EQ probably would measure, and we do lots of measurement for EQ if you want it, it's probably going to measure of a maximum of 160, somewhere between 135 and 155. About 50% of you will measure 100. So you're at an average score, which means sometimes you use emotional information and sometimes you don't. And then the balance of you, your EQ is 1 to 2 standard deviations below the norm. And if I said to you your IQ was 1 to 2 standard deviations below the norm, you'd have a heart attack. And for good reason. You don't get to where you are today without having at least an average intellectual quotient. What you may not realize, because we don't value it, is how many people to get to very high levels of leadership with low EQ. But we sure as hell feel it, A, when we get there ourselves and we're struggling, and B, when we're working with a leader who we can see has very low emotional intelligence. They're not picking up the cues from the team, they're not aware of the team, and it can feel like for you with high emotional intelligence, they're doing that behavior deliberately. Unbeknownst to you, they just can't see it. So 1, we don't look properly. 2, we look, we don't see, because it's not our skill. 13 intelligences, and one of them is emotional quotient, and some people just don't have it. And the third reason, and that will not be for anyone who's online, but can be for someone you know, they look, they see, and they don't care. That's psychopathology. And unfortunately, and you all know, I can see lots of noddies and laughing at the moment, the number of people who get into executive roles who could be discussed or described as clinically psychopathic. That doesn't mean they don't have acquired values from good family upbringing. They don't mean to be uncaring. They just are. They don't feel what other people feel. And you might have someone with EQ of 70, that's 2 standard deviations below the norm, and a member of their team has got EQ at 135, 145. That's, you know, close to 3 standard deviations above the norm. So it's 5 points of difference between the two. I know who I want when I'm negotiating something. I want the high EQ. I know when I'm making a decision as a leader, I want high EQ people around me. But we don't even realize this is a thing. So if you're the sort of person that walks into a busy room and you get the mood in a room, that's high EQ. If you can read people's faces and not use the term empath, because basically all human beings are empathetic other than the psychopath. So that's as you go into this piece with Shell, a little bit deeper, a little bit further, just remember you have to look. And if you're not looking, you won't see. And you have to look and try and understand the other person. Otherwise, it'll be all your emotions. People who are very emotional are highly describe themselves as empathetic. Often are people who project emotions onto other people, and they are their own emotions. So you have to put a value on emotional information and recognize you won't pick it up if you don't look.
So there's some great questions in the chat. That is a whole nother conversation. We would love to address all of them now. And we've got, 20 minutes left. But
What
yeah,
are the questions, Shell?
so firstly, it can be, absolutely more difficult to read emotions on the screen, which is why it's so important to understand, ask great questions. You have to bring in that curiosity to is what I'm observing correct? Let's fact check that with some questions. And so have in your back pocket those questions ready that might connect you to somebody to get a sense of, is what I'm observing, the restlessness, the looking away, what is the reason behind that? Yeah, our own biases absolutely come into play. And this is, it's not binary. The emotions follow a logical order, but there are many variables here right now as to why some people have higher EQ than others and can pick up emotions. Neurodiversity absolutely comes into that. And that again is, as I said, it's a whole nother masterclass.
Although we would say, remember, and I offer you this as someone who is neurodiverse, is you can learn to do it. And some people who are neurodiverse are very good at reading other people, very singular at reading other people. So neurodiversity doesn't typecast. As best we're beginning to understand, it's just a different way of the brain's function. Sally, great question. What do you mean when you say be careful about the word empath? All human beings have a portion of the brain that has evolved over millions of years to enable us to be empathetic to other people. So we cry when other people cry. We laugh when they laugh. When somebody goes, we go, oh, what's that smell? This, it's a terrible thing to say, but somebody farts in a room and one person goes, oh, did someone fart? And everyone breathes in. So we communicate a whole stack. It's true, Tracy. We communicate a whole stack of emotional states to each other all the time. And the person who can't do that is going to be really struggling in life because they're missing all this information that informs how we interact with one another. Very, very important. You are all empathetic. The psychopath is not. It's the only measure we have on psychopathology is they do not feel what other people feel. That doesn't mean they're terrible if they've been raised in a family where there were good values at play. It just means they have to artificially manufacture what other people feel.
The other part of that empath is it sits in EI diagnosis via the testing. Is an empath could be someone who recognizes emotion and feels them, takes on other people's emotions, therefore high empath, but doesn't know what to do with them, can't shift them. So it's like someone's in a bad mood, notice the word bad, someone's frustrated, all of a sudden they start to feel that and they don't know why. They don't know how to shift it because they're a high empath where they take on other people's emotions very easily and don't know what to do with it.
And that takes you back to the acronym I gave you, which is RUUM, the ability to recognize emotions, to use them. Recognizing and using emotion is experiential. You do it in the moment. It's very quick. But you can cognitively learn to use emotion. And so we show you the Plutchnik tulip, but there's also a book we can give you. We can give you diagnostics on this. We can coach you on this. And that is the ability to come to understand emotions are logical, sequential, and far bigger than what your IQ can do for you. So all of that you can learn, and you can learn it cognitively. And then the last bit is managing. So I recognize and use experientially, and I understand and I manage cognitively. I think about it. I manage my emotions and I can manage the emotions of others. And we call it the before, during, and after trick. I manage an interaction, which I know is going to be complex, by preparing for it, like performance management. In the moment when it's not going to plan, I pause, I breathe, I adjust. I read the face of the person I'm with. They probably aren't going to hear me right now. They're angry, they're frightened, they're disappointed, they're confused. Afterwards, how do I feel? How do they feel? Informs what I do next. So recognize, use, understand, and manage, and then use before, during, and after when you're working with other people. Shell.
Yeah, so we're going to leave you with some questions to ask yourself and then ask of others as a way to start using what you've learned today as the first step in, okay, how do I manage emotions? And anyone who's done other diagnostics or self-development with that in a group will know this kind of links to that whole achievement piece in the lifestyles inventory and constructive behavior and thinking, because I have to know, what am I feeling right now? Simply label it. If we can't name it, we can't tame it. In that moment, rather than go down the emotional response path, we have to just simply ask ourselves, what is my goal right now? Because when we go to task, it actually helps disconnect the emotional response. So what is my goal? And is my current emotion helpful to meet that goal? And if not, where do I need to be? And where or how am I going to draw on those strategies to shift where I am now to where I need to be? And focus on the goal. Just focus on what is my task right now. It'll stop the chatter in your head. It'll slow down the emotional response, and it'll help you regain your thoughts. Okay, moving to others. What do you do around others when you're trying to either get them into a state or you're observing a response? So managing others is simply, what are they feeling now? So what are you observing? How can you fact check that with some great questions? Ask them, what is their goal? And you can bring in the collective, what is our goal? So build a bridge by finding, well, what are we both here to do? We might be at opposites in views, but we have to find some common language and a common goal. And then we can work out, is what we're observing, is what they're feeling now helpful for them to actually help us achieve the goal? And what might we do to help assist them? And sometimes we just have to call it, pause the meeting, pause the conversation and say, you know what? I'm just going to pause this. Let's regroup. Are you okay to regroup in, half an hour, a day, whatever? Sometimes you've just got to break that circuit, because in that moment, the person is not resourceful, is unable to flick the switch in the time needed to create the right emotion to get the task or job done. So bringing it all together.
Shell, just before we bring
Yeah.
it all together, there's a couple of great questions in the chat.
Yep, great. Let's
And first one is, I love this. Do you think that organizational burnout creates psychopaths? That's from Jess. Oh, Jess, that's such a great question. It probably produces both zombies and psychopaths. So I shudder to think what the world's going to be like 50 years from now. We're all going to be underwater and only coping if you're a zombie or a psychopath. I can't say with any degree of certainty that organizational burnout creates psychopaths. I think it can turn you into a very angry person, because part of you is saying, this is not how I want to live my life. And what I'll say about recognizing emotions in yourself is, don't let the world run away with your spirit. Don't let the world run away with you. You're in the driving seat, and you want to pay attention to emotional cues long before reason. If you're starting to feel anxious about your work, finding yourself waking up at 3 a.m. and ruminating over something that happened in the day, your brain is trying very hard to give you cues about your well-being. the biggest problem with that is we override it because we have a potentially false duty of care to another person. For many women, there is hyper anxiety around letting someone down. I want them to know I care about them and wanted to do a good job, but I'm willing to do that at the expense of my well-being. So I think a burnout, I want you to see the emotional cues your beautiful system was giving you way before you burnt out. Way before you burnt out. Because this is your life. And, you know, always remember the conditions for existence in our beautiful universe exist for about 30% of the life of the universe. So we're not here for very long, and don't take yourself too seriously. I could be wrong, but it appears hard for younger people to manage emotions. Is that necessarily true over time? What causes that? You know, what I would say to anyone over the age of 30, love the shit out of young people. This is a very challenging time for him. They're hearing so much in their system. Social media is beginning to turn into a true nightmare. And I'd like to put a swear word at the beginning of that, but I won't. It really is a nightmare that you get these terrible comparative anxiety. I'm never good enough. I have a theory that the whole issue around sexual identity stems from the fact that online is the perpetual opportunity to be judged. And so we started this conversation about the fear of not belonging, of being rejected, and we can come close to ending it in the same space, this incredible fear of not fitting in. I think that young people are hearing a lot about the state of the planet, and unfortunately, adults over the age of 25 aren't. Your kids are being educated to know that we've gone over the tipping point, that the next decade is all about adaptation. And even if we right now did everything we could do to protect the planet, it would be 50 to 100 years before it stabilizes. So there is no avoiding the climatic chaos that the next 10 to 50 years is going to show us all. And your kids know that. And finally, if that's all happening, what am I going to do? Who am I going to be? Where do I fit in? Do I really want to work that hard? So yes, I suspect it is hard for them, but not because we're more able, but because their world is more hurtful and more complex. So be as loving and as caring as we can be. And Shell, the last question, I don't really understand what you mean by what is the goal.
Yeah, so I'll actually put the last slide up, Molly, to help you with that, in the sense that, you know, we've got to get the data in. What are we feeling right now? So that you're bringing it all together. Thanks, Chris. So, you know, first of all, getting the data in, what are we feeling? So, for instance, what am I feeling? If I've got to, let's just say I have to go into a performance management meeting with somebody. So I've got to be able to really quickly be aware, what's my goal in that meeting? Well, my goal is to stay calm, open to what's happening with them. So I've really got to keep myself on in that view of looking at them, taking a note of any changes. So I've got to be able to help them through the conversation. So I've got to harness the power of emotions to keep myself calm. And what's the goal? The goal is to deliver the performance message to them. And I've got to keep that goal in mind, but I've also got to realize this is a person who has their own feelings. I've got to know about what keeps them awake at night. Are they worried they're going to lose their job? Are they worried that they're going to be demoted? So I've got to have all this. This is all happening around me, and I've got to be clear, what's my goal as I go into that meeting? I've got to understand what might come up in that meeting for that person. So I've got to be clear of what's their goal. Their goal might be, I don't want to lose my job. I want to get out of this meeting. I'm worried that I'm not good enough. We've got to be aware goals are simply an outcome we're tracking for. And so the managing together is, what do I have to do for myself? What's my goal of this upcoming meeting, event, task? what is it for the other person? So goal is a heading for an outcome. Does that make sense, Molly?
Also, at its simplest, just remember when you are hijacked by your emotion, you go from using anger, for instance, to becoming an angry person. Your goal is vengeance. It's aggressive, forward-moving attack. If you do attack, we know that you will regret it a short while later because the emotion has taken over. So the ability to stop, breathe, challenge yourself and choose a different strategy is simply saying, right now I want vengeance. Right now I want to prove to this person they're wrong. Well, unfortunately, if you are out of control of your emotions, that's not going to happen. So how do I regain calmness and clarity? Whenever you want to affect a change, you can't do it by becoming an angry person, but you can use anger. You can't do it by becoming a sad or hopeless person, but you can use sadness. So it's the ability to use the emotion to get an outcome, not be controlled by the emotion. Takes practice, by the way. So we're kind of at the end of this, and I want to say to everyone that there are a bazillion things you can do to grow this skill. Absolutely so many things you can do. Unlike IQ, which is kind of pretty fixed, EQ can be developed. And I would say also as a leadership activist that emotional resilience and agility and adaptability will be the single most important skill you will develop in the next decade. Got to put some effort into it. And if you're struggling and don't know where to go, come to us, reach out to us. We do measurements. We do EQ capability measurements. We do EQ testing similar to IQ testing. We coach lots and lots of leaders. We coach teams because a team that is emotionally resilient and average intelligence will outperform a highly intelligent team that is emotionally dumbed down. So build emotional resilience in teams, build it in organizations. What emotional resilience means in organizations is when something goes wrong, we're not bowled over by it. We regroup, we regather, we find our goal and our charm and our hope, and we do it again. We try again. We don't give up when we reach a hurdle. And many are good idea founders because we don't have emotional scope. It's what we do in Compass, and you all know who've done the Compass program. We focus on purpose and values and what you're trying to do in life. We focus on the stories you tell yourself. We focus on building the skills to change old stories so they're helpful. That's emotional resilience. We build in Compass Advance influence and understanding the narrative of power. In all the leadership work we do, whether it's in Australia or overseas, whether it's at an executive table or a team leader, always building emotional resilience and agility in the work that we do. It's a gift.
Thanks, Faye. Before we all head off, we would love to hear from you. We have another session coming up, and I'm going to hand to Chris to say or Sarah when the next session is, but we'd love to hear from you, and we're going to pop up the poll now to get your feedback. How would you like to take this further, and what would you like to explore in our next final lunchtime leadership session? Over to Chris or Sarah to give some more context on that.
Sure. So thanks, Shell and Faye. Yes, so we have our final lunchtime leadership session of the year, which will be towards the end of November. And because this was such an incredible response to this topic, we thought, instead of picking something that we think would be really useful for you, polling you all and seeing what would be the most useful thing as we recap the end of the year and potentially building on what we've all learned about today. So look forward to seeing all those words pop up on the screen at the moment. Oh, Yvonne, you're on the phone and you can't poll or you can't toll. You can just write in the chat, Yvonne, what you want, darling.
Anyone can pop it in the chat if you can't get onto the Mentimeter.
Diffusing conflict is a corker because it can be done much faster than you think. We work with a lot of exec teams who are in and have been in a bewilderingly awful state for a long time, and we can change it in 48 hours. So yes, there's a lot you can do on there.
Keep the
Thank you,
comments.
everyone. Big hugs to you all. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day yourselves.
Thanks very much, guys. That was excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne. That was really lovely to hear your voice.
Yeah.
Nice. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
No, excellent session. Thank you.
Been way too
Ciao.
long, Yvonne.
Thanks.
I know. I've got so much to tell you, but
Yeah,
maybe
let's
another time.
Soon.